21 people have been found guilty for their part in the Madrid train bombings in which 191 people were killed 3 years ago. 3 of those convicted were sentenced to thousands of years in jail, although under Spanish law they can only spend a maximum of 40 years behind bars. 7 other defendants, including the alleged mastermind, were acquitted of all the charges against them. Tim Friend reports from Madrid.
After all the security and controversy surrounding this trial, when it came, the end was almost matter of fact. The judge reading out his verdicts and sentences quickly and clinically. Reaction from the defendants was muted, almost as though they had been expecting such a result after a 5-month trial held in a fortified courthouse. But some defendants were acquitted, and outside there were relatives who expressed disappointment at the sentences.
For us, it wasn't an exemplary verdict. The sentences were too short, and some of them were let off.
For the relatives now giving their post-trial interviews, the conclusion of this trial marks the end of months of anguish. Most of the ringleaders were found guilty, but many experts here in Spain believe that the threat of further attacks still exists. Among them is a former key government advisor. Do you think a threat still exists?
The threat still exists. Al-Qaeda is naming Spain quite frequently and very aggressively, recovering this ideal of conquering Al-Andalus again. And then all these developments in Northern Africa in connection with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic Maghreb are particularly disturbing to us.
The Madrid bombings threw Spain into turmoil. The horror of the event itself was met with disbelief. First, the ruling Conservatives blamed ETA, the Basque separatist group. But within 3 days, there was a scheduled general election, during which the Socialists were triumphant. They concentrated their investigations on groups inspired by Al-Qaeda. Most of those in court were young men from Morocco. But after the trial, their lawyers were still insisting that evidence against their clients was flimsy and circumstantial.
Our reaction is negative because we don't believe the evidence would stack up in any other court in the world.
Spain's politicians say the trial has proved a triumph of democracy over extremism. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera, Madrid.
Some 250 Taliban fighters have been surrounded on the outskirts of Afghanistan's second city, Kandahar. Afghan and NATO-led troops have been fighting intense battles over the past 24 hours, in which some 50 Taliban fighters and 4 Afghan security personnel have been killed. The Taliban moved into the Arghandab district of Kandahar following the death of a powerful tribal leader. Al Jazeera has exclusive pictures of the fighting in this report from Hamish MacDonald.
Attacking the Taliban. On the outskirts of Kandahar city, international forces, along with the Afghan army, strike their enemy's position. These exclusive pictures, filmed by Al Jazeera, show US Special Forces joining Canadian troops in the operation. It began on Tuesday and, according to local sources, continued on Wednesday. Afghan police say 20 Taliban fighters were killed, while residents living in the area say the casualties were higher.
The fighting is still going on with the Taliban. We have all left our places, everyone, big and small. But maybe there are a few people left behind.
The Taliban now says it controls 3/4 of the Arghandab district, a strategic area to the north of Kandahar city. It's the first time since 2001 that large numbers of Taliban fighters have been able to dominate this area. Control here would put the Taliban within striking distance of southern Afghanistan's largest city. The Taliban now says it does want to take control of Kandahar, but many believe that would be difficult to achieve. The US military has a major base in the city, so at this stage it's clear the Taliban would struggle to drive out the international forces. Hamish MacDonald, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
And Hamish MacDonald says the fighting for Kandahar is forcing civilians out of the area.
We understand that heavy fighting has continued throughout the course of Wednesday. The US and Afghan military are saying that they have the Taliban surrounded in this district just to the north of Kandahar city. Taliban sources are saying to Al Jazeera that that is not the case, that their fighters are not surrounded at this point in time. Now, the area we're describing has strategic importance because Kandahar city is a major military base for the US and other international forces which are fighting in the southern parts of Afghanistan. Now, we're also hearing reports that large numbers of civilians are being forced to flee the region because of the heavy fighting, and we're being told that the battles are likely to continue over the coming days. Hamish MacDonald, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Iraq says it's taking steps to crack down on Kurdish separatists in response to Turkish demands. Iraq's foreign minister has confirmed extra checkpoints are being set up to stop food and fuel supplies getting through to PKK fighters holed up in Iraq's northern mountains. This as the Turkish military continues its border offensives, as Shireen Tadros reports.
The build-up continues. Around 100,000 Turkish troops backed by tanks, artillery and warplanes lining the border with Iraq. A show of force by the Turkish army, which has been bombarding villages in northern Iraq for more than 2 weeks. And as the army continues to reinforce, the politicians keep insisting a full-scale incursion is not the way forward. The president of the Kurdistan region calling for PKK fighters to stop operations against Turkish forces. But he says Turkey needs to do its bit too.
Turkey refuses dialogue with the Kurdistan region. Because of this, what do they expect the region to do in return? Even though we stress and emphasize our position for the 20th time now, we are for a peaceful solution. We believe that military action is not the solution. We are not part of this problem, and we will not allow anyone to drag us into a war that is not our war.
A sentiment echoed by those living in northern Iraq. This man says Turkish attacks aren't about getting rid of the PKK, but disturbing the stability of Kurds living here. And others too say things are stable in this village. Turkey's motive, many told us, is to get a share in Kirkuk and Kurdish areas. In the last 3 days, there have been more attacks on what Turkey say are Kurdish rebel positions near the border. Turkish sources say they've killed dozens of PKK fighters, but there are thousands more. Turkey's Prime Minister says intensifying military action is now unavoidable. He's due to meet US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice on Friday in Ankara and President George Bush in Washington next week. Erdogan accuses the Iraqi Kurdish leader of aiding and abetting the PKK.
We will talk very clearly to US officials about how this terrorist organization is being supported. There are some countries that are sheltering them.
The Turkish leadership is under immense pressure from its public to deal harshly with PKK fighters. Funerals of Turkish soldiers killed during clashes are increasingly turning into huge anti-PKK rallies, as the national appetite for a full-scale incursion into northern Iraq grows. Shireen Tadros, Al Jazeera.
Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah has discussed terrorism and the Iranian nuclear standoff in talks with Britain's Prime Minister Gordon Brown. The two leaders met as part of King Abdullah's 4-day state visit to the UK. Before his trip began on Monday, King Abdullah criticised Britain's record on fighting terrorism. Protesters plan a demonstration outside the Saudi embassy in London later Wednesday to focus on the kingdom's human rights record. Hundreds of people in Chad have been protesting against the group of aid workers arrested for trying to smuggle children out of the country. Locals gathered in the eastern town of Abeche chanting no to the slave trade and no to child trafficking. The group, led by French children's charity workers, claims they were trying to relocate Sudanese orphans with European families. A spokesman for African Union peacekeepers in Somalia has urged the international community to give more support in preventing piracy. The plea comes as Somali pirates hijacked a North Korean vessel on Monday off the coast of Mogadishu. The 22-member crew was saved with the help of US Navy personnel following a deadly battle.
The good news that we have is that the crew members fought their way and beat off the hijackers. We have information that most of the hijackers were killed during that fight inside the ship. And the crew members managed to rescue themselves. I think that's very good.